Hey everyone, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast. This show is about helping you grow as a coach by standing on the shoulders of giants. Each show, you get a different mentor in your ear. The early motivations, the successes, the failures, the tools, the tricks, and the insight into where the industry is going. All of it so you can make your own dent in the world. Remember, success leaves clues. Now, without further ado, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Coach Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Wittwer. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Mollie Eastman of Sleep is a Skill. Now, kind of gave it away in the title, but yes, we're going to talk a lot about sleep on this episode, but we're also going to talk about entrepreneurship. Now, really, Mollie's lack of sleep came from her entrepreneurship journey. And because of that lack of sleep, that really built her next business, which is Sleep is a Skill, where she has courses, she has a weekly newsletter, she has a podcast, she consults with some of the top brands, some of the top poker players to help improve their sleep. And we get into all of that in this episode. Mollie is such a dynamic, fun individual that this episode is going to fly by. But she has a ton of nuggets around entrepreneurship, and we definitely get into sleep. So those are things that you're interested in. This episode is going to be a must listen. I hope you enjoy this episode with Mollie Eastman on the Coach Catalyst podcast. Mollie, welcome to the Coach Catalyst podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So we met at the Super Coach Summit.
Yes.
And you came on and killed it. And so I'm like, let's do a podcast. So here we are.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I so appreciate that. When I shared my kind of clips from the event, yeah. I also shared that the fact that that happens in my life regularly now is just still crazy. I remember years ago, literally throwing up before getting on a stage. So the fact that I do this now routinely is mind blowing and speaks to sleep, because a lot of the origin of a lot of my anxiety and things that I would be dealing with came from a lifestyle with certainly not prioritizing sleep by any means. Yeah. And I believe that to be such a superpower for any performance-based initiatives, and certainly for your audience. Right. I think they're going to really enjoy this conversation.
Well, we're going to get into all of that, and especially your growth as a coach. But today, if you're at a cocktail party, how do you introduce yourself?
So good. I love that question. Because I used to dread that question years ago before I had found the thing for me, and which is now I'm so grateful to truly give my life to this topic of sleep. So now what it is I say I own a company called Sleep is a Skill that helps people optimize their sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change.
Cool. If I were to ask you that same question 15 years ago, what would you have said then?
Oh my God. All kinds of fumbling and, well, so at the time, there's different points in my life where I had different failed ventures or kind of like ventures that didn't align. So at one point I owned a company called the Lecture Loft. I was in Manhattan, a large loft space. So I'd have different live events come through of people actually sharing things that are important to them. So a lot of public speaking and different initiatives. Worked with the company in the nonverbal group, looking at nonverbal communication and how your interactions, how you can up-level your interactions. And from that, looking at a lot of behavioral change, so how you can bring certain behavioral change implementation into your life. So they kind of ripple out into somewhat of what I do today. But back then, it was a lot of not feeling congruent with the things that I was doing, for my livelihood. And that was a problem.
So were you in kind of this health and fitness, sleep recovery world from the beginning, or were you more in this kind of communications world and that's where the Lecture Loft came in? But where did you start? What was your initial interest?
Yeah, really good question. So it kind of melded. So I would say what has always been present is this topic of behavioral change. So really everything I'm doing now is rooted in behavioral change and getting curious and looking at what does it take for us to have lasting change. So that's always been present. That was part of, my studies at Syracuse. We're looking at nonverbal communication, interactivity, and how we can make that lasting change in any area. So that's always been a through line. However, the piece of the health and wellness component truly was coming out of my own, your mess is your message type saying, and my own mess of my own health and well-being. And that was really the genesis, eventually then for sleep as a skill. But at first it was just a survival technique of trying to feel well and perform in whatever capacity on a daily basis, and having an experience of life of one. I grew up poor, not a lot of money, on welfare in a trailer, all the things where the types of foods I was eating were not one of high nutrient value. Sleep was really a mess. So I had a lot of kind of the origin piece of a missing of actually feeling well routinely. And I actually didn't know that was even possible for me to wake up and feel great. I didn't think that was even in the cards. So as going down that journey of kind of wellness, and then at a certain point tapping into that, if you will, the biohacker domain and all of those things, this ended up being really transformative in my own life. And then it rippled out into, taking that on as a lifestyle and business.
Right. So have you always wanted to be into business and kind of do the startup thing and kind of build your own thing?
Yes, definitely. Things that I love about being an entrepreneur is I feel like it's an opportunity to practice growth and development daily, because it's really all on you, all on your shoulders. And that can either be a confronting thing or a really empowering thing, because then, it's all on me. And so if we continue to improve and optimize and get curious, and also sometimes it's, being real about our limitations or where our current limitations are and how we can improve those. I feel like it's just a really cool lifestyle opportunity for all of us to take, maximum personal responsibility.
I'd recommend this to any coaches or even clinicians out there that are looking to build a business around a product that they already really believe in.
As a brand new user, just being sold on the streamline of being able to put everything in a centralized location. Anyone that is just fumbling with Google Sheets to Facebook messages, group messaging, text messaging.
For anybody that wants to be able to coach their clients, many times you use different tools and resources, and when you're trying to manage that, even on a Google Sheet or on regular technology, you're limited on duplicating the data over and over.
I think if I'm going to, recommend the app for anyone, it's going to be myself. If I want to take my business to the next level, so definitely looking to do that in the near future here. Everybody can really benefit from it. I use it in the rehab sphere, but I also utilize it in the training thing. You can do the same thing with nutrition, right? There's so many uses for it.
For everybody, coaches, clinicians, anyone that kind of works in the industry, chiros, PTs, trainers.
This is one simple solution that we can create to all of our users and all our clients.
So if you want to create a way to systematize your business so you can scale, I have not seen a better product for that.
What was the first venture? What was the first kind of business? Did you do businessy stuff kind of as a kid and were like selling candy and cards and whatever? Or was this something that you kind of took on once you kind of got through Syracuse?
So really funny story. And it's really top of mind because I just watched on HBO. I don't know if you've seen this, but the Telemarketers series.
No.
So I was a telemarketer in high school. And so I know. And so I was a telemarketer in high school, and it was selling credit cards of all things. And so what was so crazy about that is it really was interesting training ground. Now, this series on HBO is wild and talks about all kinds of insane activities. But this particular, my journey with that, I think was a really cool training ground because it really had you practice overcoming objections. One of the biggest takeaways I got out of telemarketing was to always kind of some form of parroting back what the person said before you, and then layered in with tons of, I completely understand. Oh, that makes so much sense. A lot of which turns out you actually do bring in some element of that into interpersonal relationships if you, just in general, but certainly as a business owner, different interactions and the customer's always right type of isms. And it was just a really crazy training ground, but it was also, you had all these goals that you would, the setup was nuts. You would come in, there would be like huddles, there's Red Bull thrown around. It was all like young people. And so they would print out these stats of where everyone was at. And then you would try to like compete with the people next to you, and everyone was standing up. Like it was like before standing desks were a thing, but people would be standing up and you're going hard. It was a wild environment. But it just really did have you train because people would hang up on you all the time. And you're like, okay, next. And it only it's funny because that just came up after watching that show. It just brought it back into my forefront of how interesting that training kind of was.
Well, it really teaches you to deal with failure well, because you have to get on that next call immediately if you want to be successful. It's just curious.
Smile while you dial.
Right. Just curious on like the leaderboard. Where were you? Were you kind of towards the top? Were you in the middle? Were you towards the bottom? How did you fare in the telemarketer world?
I performed pretty well. Now I performed, I think, decently only because for a couple of reasons. One, I think I really have this thing that I'm actually trying to constantly overcome, which is the nice girl thing, the ensuring that they are feeling heard and want to have like a nice interaction with people. Some people don't care about that. Like there are people around me that could care less, and that wasn't their objective. So those were both good and not good for me, so there's pluses and minuses to that. But that did seem to help create relatability quickly with people and just connect on a human level. And then you can get into, the credit card or the whatever. But so often would be ranking fairly decently. And then what would come about with that was you would get different, bonuses or all these things. And as a high schooler, it kind of made it sort of more fun and interactive.
Right. It's like a game.
Yeah, totally.
What was the biggest takeaway from that experience? What was your I'm glad I did that because it taught me what?
Yeah. So for me, I'm glad I did that it's really teaching that resiliency, the bouncing back, the not taking no for an answer, or not taking things so personally. And just the ability to almost regenerate yourself on every new call, so even if the person right before you 2 seconds ago was like yelling at you, taking you off your list, blah, blah, blah. Then the next thing is suddenly you're back at it with, the grandma who now is open for communication if you're able to regenerate yourself and not bring that past into your future.
Right. I bet there's some wild stories about what you hear on telemarketer calls, but kind of moving on to your first thing. What was the first thing for you that at least got a little bit of traction? Isn't what you're doing now, but where you felt like you were building that first business? Yeah.
So another one that I did was gratitude app. Part of the reason for that was because one of the longest streaks I've ever done. I love counting things and having, just streak effects in whatever area I might be taking on. And certainly for behavioral change, we know that can often be beneficial to kind of feel like you're, taking on some sort of quest or journey or, has some objective data to it. So one of the longest things I've ever done consistently was for 2,500 days in a row, sending gratitude emails to friends and family. And this was a really transformative act because that was many years. And throughout that, part of the big thing for me that actually had that stick around was the accountability aspect. So since there were friends and family on there and I numbered everyone, so 1,242.
That's like 7 years. I'm trying to do the math here, but that's a long time. And you didn't miss a day.
Didn't miss a day. And this was so revolutionary because I would have never, I'm clear, kept that going if it was just to myself. But it was something about the officialness of it. It was numbered every day. I had people on there that now expected that for all those years. It wasn't it was just a small group of friends and family.
Okay.
But it was, so it was a really interesting kind of training ground to how to keep gratitude present as a created act. So, because just about even with all those days, still just about every night. So I always did it like the last thing I did with my phone. So it'd be my end of day close down thing. And so I'd reflect on the day and I would write what there is to be grateful for. And every night it still would be like, well, what is there? I don't know. And then when you start writing it and you're like, oh yeah, that cool thing happened. That cool thing happened.
Yeah.
And it really trained for that, appreciation of, even if it was like, a maybe not so particularly noteworthy day and some fanfare of crazy things, but that you're able to spot the things that you're thankful for. It really kind of trained almost like a mantra or something.
Right.
So the fact of having that also at a group dynamic, one cool thing. So I, researched gratitude. And one of the cool effects of this shared spoken or declared gratitude effects seem to have this stickiness or almost spidering out to the listener and impacting them. So it can seem to have this measurable change for the audience member. And then if they share their gratefuls, which would be something that would happen a lot on the emails. So I would send that out and then people would respond back and they'd be like, oh, well, grateful for whatever. And so it would just kind of have this domino effect. So that was part of the app, was having this kind of like social component to gratitude. So played with that. And yet at the same time, there was still all these things that weren't working in my life, including my sleep, by the way. So it actually did take for me really that period of going through those stressors and, being pulled in a lot of different directions. And then that period of insomnia that actually changed my whole experience of life. And so it ended up that while I thought that was one of the lowest moments, ended up being one of those transformative moments.
So we're going to get to that, but I have one very important question before that.
Yeah.
Did you ever fall asleep? You're just really tired from the day, fall asleep and wake up at 11:30 and you're like, oh, I haven't sent my thing today. And quick ran over to the computer or your phone and then to keep the streak going.
Totally. And I was, by the way, there was so many weird timelines of settings. So this was back when I would be so justified and righteous about being an extreme night owl, I'd call myself. So I'd be going to bed super late. So people would get my emails sometimes at 3 a.m. and whatever. So, not that part's not always advisable, but yes, there was a lot of those. Oh God. Especially with travel. So traveling internationally or what have you. There's different times where then I'd have to send it preemptively right before getting on the plane to wherever, because then you'd lose hours.
So
it was really nuts.
So what happened? What broke the streak? That was 7 years, 6.5.
I know. Isn't that wild?
Was it just I'm good, I'm done, or?
Yeah, it was definitely a mindful thing because I did start to see for myself, this also came out of some interesting research too around different ways to practice gratitude and how some of it can have the highest yield. And it did occur to me, and it, I'm sure it could have recreated in a different way or what have you, but I felt complete with that way of practicing that, relationship to it. So meaning I wanted to test out other ways of doing this. So whether that's in interactions, so bringing it into, the dinner you're meeting up with the person, or just more in real time and with another person live. So practicing some of those. And I just saw for myself that one thing I didn't like was at a certain time, I felt like I was starting to just go through the motions and almost like a shallow gratitude, where you're kind of grateful for, whatever, the hot water. So it just felt like there was an opportunity to kind of complete that chapter. I'd gotten really the yields that I was looking for out of it and start, kind of a new venture there.
Do you feel like you're not everyone sticks for something for 7 years? I would say probably very few people do. Is this kind of this, I don't want to say obsessive compulsive, but that's kind of what I'm kind of saying. Yeah. And is that do you feel like that's maybe a core personality trait? So you were able to do it, or you were just seeing the value and you're like, oh, I just got to keep it going. And then it got to a point where I don't want to break the streak. And so you kept going that way.
Yeah. So really good question. So some of the training and some of the coaches that I have in my own life, a lot of the modalities that I've gone into are rooted in ontology. So the study of being and how we're being, moment to moment to moment. And part of that kind of modality is looking at being your word. So, and that's a lot of my coaches that I have in my life. And some of the things that I'll bring into sleep as a skill is how to practice being our word routinely. So that was kind of an exercise in being your word. And so I've kind of shifted that over into other ventures. So one example is now for over 5 years, I've done a weekly sleep obsessions newsletter every Monday. And, haven't missed a Monday. That's also numbered. So, I love counting things. So we're at, 200 and something, 50 or something editions of that. And so being my word for that was actually really transformative because when I first started that newsletter, it was like finding its footing and there was like 5 people on it and, my mom and probably a cat or something. There's like, but you just keep doing it because you said you were going to. And then in the development of that, then suddenly, then you get more attuned to what people like and what's helpful. And then you just sharpen your skill set by just showing up. And I feel like, especially in the world of entrepreneurship, half the thing is showing up, Same rules apply for my podcast. So now we've been doing that for over 3 years. I just got word today that now it appears that we're now the #1 sleep podcast. We used to be the #2. Apparently looks like we've been the #1 for a little while. I just didn't realize. Someone else had sent me some rankings and stuff. Right. But point being, I think a big part of it is just because I keep showing up. It's not even that it's particularly, it's just the showing up is half the battle.
Right. You just outlast people and there's going to be less people in the last mile than there are in the first mile. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think the word thing has changed my life for sure. And it's not to say that, because it doesn't always mean that then you're like a slave to your word, because if you then, reflect and see, all right, well, I no longer want to give my word to this. So I'm going to declare this complete, or if you break your word, then honoring that word and restoring the connection to that. And for both you and the person that you might have impacted by the break of that word, and just kind of communicating, well, is this important to me? Is this not important to me? If it is, okay, so I'm going to give my word to, bring in this in consistently. And if it's not, then we're going to complete that.
Right. It's really bringing an intentionality kind of around everything that you're doing.
Totally. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's certainly areas of my life that definitely working on my word in certain things, in particular areas and, but for those areas that I do feel and have reflected that are going to be really supportive for myself, for clients, for, my business, then it can really be a helpful skill set.
Oh, that's awesome.
As a coach that runs challenges, I needed my life back. I had stuff all over the place. A Facebook group for community interaction, Google Sheets for check-ins and measurements, and was drowning in email communication. As my challenges grew past just a handful of people, I started to notice clients were falling through the cracks. I began researching virtual assistants because I just couldn't manage it all. And truthfully, the client experience was going down the drain. Luckily, a friend recommended Coach Catalyst and just told me to trust her. I'm sure glad I did. Now I can run my challenges with 2 or 200 clients with just a few clicks. The lessons get delivered on the right days, the accountability happens automatically, and most importantly, the communication is all in one spot. I even created 2 new challenges from the Coach Catalyst library. Best part, didn't have to change a thing. I used to spend 15 minutes just trying to log into all the apps I needed. Now I log in and my dashboard tells me who needs a shout out and who needs a kick in the butt in about 15 seconds. I feel like a huge weight is lifted off of my shoulders. I can finally spend my time coaching again instead of worrying about all the admin work. Do your brain a favor and get Coach Catalyst.
So was it during the kind of building of the gratitude app when you kind of hit this point where you're just, startups can make everyone not want to sleep because it's a grind day in and day out. And so was that during that time, or had you kind of moved on from that when you kind of hit this low point?
No, it was throughout that. So I was doing that along with the Lecture Loft piece and doing, so with my husband, Blake, we've been together for 12 years and he's a serial entrepreneur, wild man. And so he had also had two different companies. One was the nonverbal group that I was mentioning. The second was in poker. That's part of the connection of why I work with so many high stakes poker players for sleep optimization. And so at that point where my sleep was just, hit that rock bottom, was around, so I was partnering up with him, bringing the behavioral side of things to this company, Beyond Tells. So Beyond Tells is looking at spotting tells in poker players. So at the time, we were running the largest study ever conducted on poker players. So hundreds of poker players coming into, our space in Manhattan, and then recording them from 360 degrees, breaking down their nonverbals, their blink rate. They had different wearables even before wearables were much of a thing. And it was so intense, terabytes and terabytes of footage and data, and yet all self-funded. So bleeding money, stress to the gills, to the point of the startups and how much volatility. And the stress load of that was then where the sleep piece came into play. And it was a very disempowering, period of time at that point, and feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't even, get to sleep, this primal thing.
And so was that really the impetus to being like, okay, there's probably a lot of other people in this world that are dealing with this as well. And if I can figure it out for myself, I might be able to help a bunch of other people? Or was it just like I need to figure this out for myself if I'm going to survive another year?
Yeah. At first it was just a pure, like, I gotta just for my own livelihood, because what I was experiencing was like an inability to get anything done because I felt like I was truly losing my mind. Like it was a very scary period in my life, because also I come from a family that there's history of mental health issues. And so when I went through that period, it was a really fearful time of, oh no, is this the moment where I'm going to just, my grip on reality is going out the window. When I went to the doctors, I left with sleeping pills. And in that moment, like a fear that, all right, what path am I going down? And then the self upset or conflict of now taking these pills, because still, I wanted to sleep, but now being so angry at myself for needing to take the pills or what have you, or having that experience and feeling like there wasn't any other options from where my vantage point at the time. And then this fear of like future tripping of what is this going to mean? Am I going to be beholden on all of these pharmaceuticals to be able to just function in general? So it was a really kind of dark time. And since it was, even with taking those things, it still felt largely ineffective. I was still, really not falling asleep, still waking up all throughout the night and just feeling like the big fear was, is this forever? Am I stuck like this? Which is a common fear for a lot of people with sleeping issues, where it starts to eat away at us of saying, is this just something I'm stuck with now? Did something like break, internally? Now this is, what's destined for me.
So what was the first step that got you at least moving in the direction of like, hey, I feel like I'm getting on top of this?
Yeah, great question. So one, I did a lot of things and I spent a lot of money, time, effort, all of it, and a lot of things that were frustratingly ineffective. And because I was putting so much pressure on each thing, so for whatever it would be, the book, the approach, the supplement, the whatever, and then the night would come and go. And it didn't, fix me, quote unquote, because I was coming from this broken ideology. And then it would just be such anger and upset that, all right, another thing to add to the pile of ineffectiveness. So it wasn't until a few things kind of came into play. One, it was kind of a series of stepping into something called ACTI, acceptance commitment therapy for insomnia. It's a little bit different than some of the really well-known CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And acceptance commitment therapy can sound very counterintuitive because a lot of the practice there is accepting the fact that you aren't sleeping really well right now. And that's just kind of how it is, and certainly not putting a cap on what's possible, not just resigning to horrible sleep for the rest of your life. But for right now, for where your life is at, practicing that acceptance that, all right, it's 3:22 a.m. and I'm awake, and I might be awake for the rest of the night. We're not sure, but not fighting that and not trying to overly strategize. Because one of the things that I got tripped up with is in CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. There's a small group of people that tend to not necessarily respond to the trainings of CBTI. And I was one of them. And some of those people tend to be more anxious leaning. And for those individuals, you can start over strategizing all the rules, because there's a lot of kind of rules of how you conduct yourself when you wake up at certain times throughout the night. You get up and you go outside and you go outside the bedroom and you wash dishes, you fold laundry or whatever for this period until you get sleepy again. And just the strategizing was starting to be really problematic, because then I was just spending most of the night like wandering around, trying to get tired, being mad that I was having to do this. Whereas instead, shifting over to the ACTI, you're more practicing that acceptance, and kind of like a Chinese finger trap. The less you start, like the resistance, the more you resist it, the more stuck you are. And the more you just kind of accept that that's how it is, you can get out of the trap a little bit.
What's the one thing that people are doing that you're like, stop doing that? Or the one common thing that people do to improve their sleep, or they think this is going to work, which is like, oh, that's not a good idea?
Good question.
And there's probably a bunch of them.
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, there is totally. So a few things. One, I'll see people, even very much in the health and wellness space. For instance, the first thing that comes to mind, there's so many, but the first thing that comes to mind is certain types of relying on certain supplements or THC, gummies, all these different things to support their ability to both fall asleep and stay asleep. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we can find with those approaches is sometimes supplements can be really beneficial, but often it's kind of, turning our approach upside down and having that more be like the cherry on top, like the things that we add on after we've given these foundational approaches. And I think what so many people are missing, and this is one of the things I spoke about at the Super Coach event, was this concept of circadian rhythm entrainment. So strengthening your circadian rhythm. And I think so many people miss, including a lot of sleep professionals, I think, that are still operating from the CBTI approach, which can be so impactful. And there's a reason for that. It's tons of studies to support its efficacy. Really can be transformative for so many people. And yet my concern is, I feel for a number of practitioners that you might encounter in the area of sleep, there's often kind of two, tools in their toolkit, and it's CBTI. And then the second one is sleep testing. So it's to get you tested for sleep apnea and get you a CPAP. And if you don't have sleep apnea, and if you are not responding to CBTI, then unfortunately, a lot of professionals, it's kind of like where they end. And that's where a lot of people will come my way and they say, well, I've been tested for sleep apnea and I don't have it, or I've been treated for that and still not solving my problem. I've gone through CBTI and it's not making, the change. So now what? And so for my estimation and what I've seen from so many experts coming on the podcast, from so many the studies that I've combed through, both, through my own need initially, and then later through the creation of Sleep as a Skill, is this missing component of the fact that we require this very clear diurnal pattern to our days. So, and as diurnal creatures, it means that we are meant as human beings to be active by day and at rest at night. And we find deleterious effects of people, unfortunately, for shift workers. And it's not to discount it, because we depend on so many shift workers for many the functionalities of our society. So, that's so important. And we do know, unfortunately, the reality is that for shift workers, we find much higher rates of cancer, of diabetes, of heart disease, of stroke, and certainly sleep abnormalities, sleep difficulties, and mental health disturbances, just to name a few. So those are just purely by being active at night at the wrong times. So looking and cueing into this time domain and what are the things that impact these clocks that are in every cell and organ in our body. And I think that sometimes that gets lost or not understood or not even considered.
Right.
My favorite thing about Coach Catalyst.
My favorite thing about Coach Catalyst.
One of the things I love most about Coach Catalyst.
There are lots of things I love about Coach Catalyst.
And the reason why I love Coach Catalyst is that
the accountability off the back of that
is simplicity.
The support is amazing.
It allows me to give so much of me to my clients.
It's the drip feeding of content.
I can schedule lessons for my clients in advance.
Game changer for freeing up time.
It gives me my time back.
It's so simple and so easy.
Hi, I'm Kane, the founder of Coach Catalyst, the #1 accountability and communication software on the market today. We help coaches just like you keep their clients accountable and scale their business beyond what they've ever been able to do before. So if that sounds like something you want, let's take a look at how we can help. So Coach Catalyst was built on the 4 C's of coaching. Those are content, communication, community, and consistency. So for content, you need to go beyond just workouts and deliver the whole experience for the client so they get the results they deserve. For communication, you need to own your communication. If you don't own the communication, you don't own the client. So make sure you stop texting clients and use a centralized platform. For communities, get off of Facebook groups and take ownership over your social group with Coach Catalyst communities. And for consistency, the foundation of all results for clients, we took the best-selling book Atomic Habits and built all these fundamentals right within our app that's going to guarantee to get your clients the best results possible. If you want to start using the 4 C's with your clients, content, connection, community, and consistency, make sure you run over to Coach Catalyst and start a free trial today.
So you originally started, you were solving your own problem.
Yeah.
And then my guess is at that time, you're not thinking about how I turn this into a new venture.
Totally.
What was the first step that you took? Like, okay, I feel like I've like gone down every rabbit hole. I've been able to kind of solve my own issues to an extent with the help of other people and other experts. When were you like, okay, I kind of want to be the expert here. And what was the first step in going down that road?
Oh, yeah, really great question. Because to your point, when I was dealing with what I was dealing with, I felt so totally like broken in that area that so the last thing I was thinking would be in my future, because it was just a matter of like, I got to get this figured out. And in the process of that, one of the things, for better or for worse, I had joined a ton of online forums across all things. So meaning, I was in every, Facebook group or some of these, random forums that are created around people taking sleeping pills, benzos, looking at all of these different groups of people talking about their troubles with their sleep. And initially there's a period when I was the one posting help, like, oh, I can't sleep, or combing through what I was finding to try to crack this code. And so eventually I was keeping this running tally of all the things that I had brought in and kind of like the what didn't work, what did work. And of course, there's bio-individuality, and this is like an individual experience. But one of the things that I was sharing organically was with different individuals on these groups. Once I started having some restoring of my sleep, and then eventually getting to actually experience more optimal sleep, like quantifiably with different trackers and what have you, improving my sleep measurably. Then I started, because I had such empathy for people that were really struggling, because I'd, been there and knew how, just how much it can uproot you. I mean, sleep deprivation is a form of torture and for a reason, because it can be very disorienting and really mess with you. So I started just kind of copy and pasting my long and growing list and starting, just sharing as I'm improving my sleep, then sharing it, pay it back, because a lot of people are helping me along the way. And then over time, then it just kind of organically, then in these different domains, then starting supporting people with like DM, and then start talking to the people. And one of the things that I was looking for and couldn't find, and I remember Googling this, was sleep support groups, or like AA for sleep, all of these things. And I couldn't find, this is really when I wanted that for myself. Because I felt so alone on this journey. Like it can feel very much like you're the only one on the planet dealing with this when it's, 4:20 in the morning and you're just laying there and you've been up all night. It can just feel like you are a weirdo. So instead, to be able to have a group of people to kind of sort through this, that was something that I really wanted. And that was kind of the genesis of the Sleep as a Skill, of how to make people feel hopefully less alone, and then get back in the driver's seat to provide them with steps that they can take and a pathway for action.
So essentially you're coaching people for free. You're just trying to help people.
Totally.
And then through that, you probably started to notice patterns on what was working more often, what things were good to start with, and kind of it sounds like you kind of almost using like a scientific method to an extent, and then getting that feedback and then kind of refining your hypothesis and kind of doing that over and over.
Yes. And so one of the things that was really noteworthy, and something that I still think is missing in the industry, in the sleep industry, is more attention to an emerging science, which is chronobiology, the science of time and how time affects our biology. So that was something that I became really fascinated with, because as how I shared of how my life looked before was upside down to that diurnal approach. So I was going to bed super late. There was times when the sun would be rising, birds are chirping, and I'm going to sleep. And I'd be justified and righteous about that, because I'd say, well, what's the big deal? Just sleep in later. What's the problem here? But as you start to go down the road of chronobiology and looking more at the circadian rhythm entrainment approach, you start to realize that all of these behaviors, not just when you go to bed and when you wake up, but right down to what's the amount of lux of light in your environment, what quality of that light is present from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, the amount of darkness in your space, moving on to the amount of temperature, the timing of the types of temperature you have, moving into the timing of your meals and the quality and the type of meals, how much that can all play a role. Your movement, your exercise, the type of exercise, how that can play a portion, involve itself in your sleep results, as well as something that I coined thought timing. So all under this domain of timing, that it appears that we have a diurnal function to our thoughts, where we have certain activity and mode that we've been operating in for thousands of years, really pre-Edison in a lot of ways, before we were able to have 24-hour living. We used to be much more dependent on the rhythms of nature. So when the sun would set, you shifted over just, kind of by force to different ways of thinking in the evening. So meaning that now, you're likely not hunting for elk or what have you in the middle of the night, because you don't have refrigerators, you don't have pantries, you don't have lights, you don't have any of those things. So you're kind of forced time out. And often, historically, that would mean sitting around the fire, connecting with others, music, down regulation activities just naturally. And then if we are aligned in those behaviors, we find that our biology follows suit, or, depending on vice versa, if you can inform your biology, that can also affect your psychology. So as you downregulate, then we can lower heart rate. We see body temperature go down. We see all these signs of kind of preparing you for sleep. But it turns out that in recent years, really post Edison, and as we started moving indoors, a study I cite all the time is that in 2001, the EPA found that the average person in America anyway was spending around 93% of their time indoors. And that broke down to inside and in automobiles, all of those environments taking you away from these rhythms,
right?
Including just having static temperature in our space 24/7, static type of lighting, and all of those things. So it took us outside of those rhythms. And while that might seem like a good thing, indoor plumbing, all these great things, now we're, have these luxuries, it turned out it's really messing with our biology and psychology, and certainly the sleep-wake cycle.
So is this whole like I'm a morning person versus I'm a night person? Is that just like a bunch of BS then? And it's like, well,
totally. Great question. So this is an area where there's a lot of kind of camps that some people will speak very loudly. Oh, sure. There's very clear chronotypes, and are you a dolphin? Are you this? All of these things. So that's an area of study, and there's certainly validity to that. And the thing I would also put in is a couple of things. One, this term genetic drift. So this thinking that we might drift towards a particular way where it makes sense that some of us might be more leaning a bit more early rising, a bit later leaning. But I think where the danger that I've seen, and so I was one of these people that assumed that then that could extend to extreme hours. So meaning this extreme night owl label that I gave myself, where I'm going to bed as the sun is rising, it's very unlikely that we would have been doing that in, hunter-gatherer tribes for thousands and thousands of years. Most of our history, we were out in nature. And this has only been a newer phenomenon. This is very weird behavior that we're all indoors all the time now. But in the past, we would be outside. So during that period, what we would see is it would be very strange behavior if someone in the tribe was like walking around at 3 a.m, just like looming, and that would be very odd. But now for us, because you can watch Netflix and have popcorn and do whatever, then that's not weird. But if we think about it, our biology has not shifted over to this. And that's partly, there's theories that could be part of what we're seeing with all this circadian dysregulation and the fallouts, deleterious effects on your health, your immune system, cardiovascular health, mental health, and beyond, just about every area of life impacted. So what we want to think of is a couple things. I would share on this, are there night owls, are there not? One thing I just point people to is these really amazing studies done by Kenneth Wright out of University of Colorado, where he took proclaimed night owls camping, basically. And so you took them out into the wilderness, and the first one is for a week. The second one was from a long weekend, and the measured melatonin production. And we're able to see that just simply by being connected to those rhythms of nature, no smartphones, no faux lighting. So when it's bright by day. And when it's dark, it's like massively dark, that camping type of dark where you can't see a single thing. So in a short period of time, they started moving their sleep onset time earlier, even though they had said really, clearly that they were people that went to bed much later. And so what they found is that the environment really does a lot more than we might realize. And of course, the temperature played a role and behaviors and all those things, but it moved everything earlier, much more closely to those rhythms. Now, would it still make sense that in the, our tribal history, that we likely would have had staggering where some people wake up a little bit earlier, some people wake up a little bit later? That would make sense. It would be helpful because we're vulnerable when we're sleeping. But there's still questions on, would it have extended to the rates that we're seeing now? And it appears that we might want to take our environmental cues a lot more seriously and give more reverence to that. The last thing I'll say is it appears too that some people are more sensitive to the changes in light-dark rhythms than other people. We do know from mental health components, so like people with bipolar, for example, seem to have a lot of sensitivities around if you do change around this lighting exposure, and can actually spark different episodes. So we want to realize that some of us, while, our partner might be able to sit in front of all the blue light and the TV and fall right asleep, another person might be more impacted, and they might, while they just assume that's, oh, well, I'm a night owl, could we peel back the layers and audit your behaviors a bit more and see, are you doing certain things unbeknownst to you that are creating those results?
Wow, that's fascinating. And so you obviously have a ton of passion around this subject. But how have you been able to build a business around that passion? Like, how have you kind of consciously started structuring your business? Obviously, it started with some coaching, and there was probably a point where you finally just started asking people for money in coaching them. But how have you started to kind of like now progressively build what is now kind of your passion in your life's work?
Yeah, really good question. Because in the beginning, it was all free stuff. So I was having people, kind of go through some of what I was building as this framework. And then over time, what ended up emerging was utilizing tech to really proof of concept in a lot of ways. So now every person that we work with is required to wear the Oura Ring. And what's been really cool about that is it's built this large database of data on people from a really granular perspective of how they're improving their sleep. So outside of research, so you might have large data sets that are research based, but this is more on a granular level of bringing the behavioral change and getting to plot and see what's working, what's not working. So out of that, then, so I did one-on-ones for an extended period of time. And certainly since I've had that niche in poker for quite some time, I've worked with high stakes poker players and gotten to see some really, augmented experiences of being outside of those rhythms of nature, and almost like rotating shift workers is kind of what they, fall out to. So those are particularly wild cases. So that was a really cool training ground. And then by working with them, and they're still continue to be a big like bread and butter of my business. And yet, so working with them one-on-one, often really more fine-tuned, but then adding in things like small groups and cohorts that are all tech-led. So with the Oura Ring, and then we're going to be piloting some also wearable-led groups that will also have CGMs, and then playing with doing some lab work as well. But it's just been this interesting way to bring about one of the benefits of the Hawthorne effect, which is, also thought of as the observer effect, where when people know that they're being watched, where we tend to act differently, essentially. So when people know that their stats are, fed into this group, and so we're all going to be kind of unpacking this and seeing what works, what doesn't work. Often the gumption to begin, that consistent wake up time, or doing things that support that turning off in the evening, getting physically outside, adding in fitness, all that stuff starts to often change when they know they're kind of accountable to a larger group.
So you find that when people maybe start working with a coach or part of a cohort, they start doing the things they probably know they should be doing anyways. They know they probably should be scrolling on their phones for half an hour, lying in bed. They know they should just be getting up when, the sun comes up or whatever. And then are you adding kind of some other things to that as well? Or are you allowing them to kind of drive the process?
Yeah. So I think there's a mixture of both doing what we know to do, and then also things that are just totally outside of our bounds of realizing that they're impacting us. So meaning, certainly I was doing a ton of things that I had no idea were impacting my sleep. So one of the fallacies or the problems that I was having when I was relating to my sleep, and a lot of people do this with sleep issues, is they're focusing in on the nights. And by focusing in on the nights, it was putting such pressure on your results, and almost like, can psych yourself out, because it's kind of a performance. It's kind of like, something to see how your results are. And then after a period of time, if you lose that confidence in yourself, you just kind of resign to, all right, well, I'm a bad sleeper. I'm a short sleeper. I'm a night owl. It's in my genes, and then you kind of set up life into that paradigm. The problem is if you are waiting for your nights to address your sleep, it's already too late, basically. So what you then instead want to shift on over to, and which I think is much more empowering, is when you first wake up, because so many people for so many years have had no idea and still continue to have no idea how important it is to physically get yourself outside every morning at around the same time, 7 days a week, and getting that light in your eyes, but also getting yourself physically out and moving on those consistent periods of time each day, and how much that can make a difference with your sleep results with that level of consistency, both by setting that up for the first half of your day, augmenting your brightness throughout the day, up leveling your temperature. So if you're bringing in cold therapy, we're bringing in some of those on the front half of the day, shifting over to heat therapy by night, counterintuitively, because it has that paradoxical cooling effect thereafter, because we're looking to support a rising of body temperature by day and a marked drop by night to support sleep onset. Meal timing is an area of study that so few people understand the massive impact that has. We just had one of the foremost researchers, Dr. Sachin Panda, on our podcast, who has had decades of research out of the Salk Institute. He wrote the book Circadian Code. And so few people realize just how much of a impact the timing of your food can have and the type of food can have on your sleep results. Looking at that thought timing piece, that one's a little more esoteric. That's where you're getting into whether it's kind of the, cognitive behavioral piece or the ACT, the acceptance commitment piece. And so you're navigating some of the thought timing elements, auditing your behaviors, and then also looking at some of the drugs that you might be bringing in, common ones, alcohol, THC, caffeine, but then it might extend to prescriptions, supplements, and ensuring that, anything that we are taking, that we're taking it at the right times, that makes sense, or some of these things just not serving us altogether. So kind of really getting in deep on what's working, what's not working.
And that makes a lot of sense then why the business is called Life is a Skill, because a lot of these are, or not life is a skill, sleep is a skill. And a lot of these things that you're talking about are just, they're skills. They're things that you have complete control over. And they're little tweaks that you can make to just get better at them, which ultimately then leads to a better night's sleep. So rather than focusing so much on, I just need to get a better night's sleep, it's like, let's do these things and let's just look at the numbers and see, and it falls the way it falls and we're okay with that. And then we try some other things, get better at our skills, and then kind of see how it's improving.
Yeah. And I think it's hopefully inspiring some, fascination in this thing that we do a third of our lives, on average 26 years of our lives. And yet, unfortunately, some of the stats that we have out of Harvard Med is that the average doctor is getting around 2 hours of training for this thing that we do on average 26 years of our life. And so the problems with that are that often things are kind of red flags or signs are being missed, that for one, ruling out over 100 different sleep disorders that are present. So many times we have people testing for things at least like sleep apnea, but often more. So we've had people discover that they have narcolepsy, they have restless leg, they have bruxism, so teeth grinding. They, just the list is very long of the number of sleep disorders that you might be dealing with. Because then you can do all the things, be doing those right. But if you have severe sleep apnea, good luck. And how much that's going to impact things like hormone balance for men, testosterone levels just plummet when you're not getting that consistent level of sleep. And even if you're doing all the quote unquote things right, if you have some of those disorders present and are untreated, which many people are running around, it's at least the numbers are 1 in 4 people having sleep apnea, and arguments that there's likely even more that are going undiagnosed. And even if you were tested at one point and came out having no sleep apnea, you can develop sleep apnea over time. So you might be, and especially this is true for women, as we seems to be around post 40. So going into different stages of perimenopause and menopause, then the rates of instances of sleep apnea for women become more akin to men at those times. So even if they didn't have it before, their hormonal shifts and changes and all kinds of physiological changes, they can suddenly develop sleep apnea down the road. So
that's crazy.
Ensuring that we're addressing all aspects of sleep to get those great results.
And sleep is really like, I call it like a lead domino, right? If you can get a good night's sleep, everything else just becomes a little bit easier.
Totally. Absolutely. So I would make the argument too that by beginning with sleep on our wellness journey, it makes your ability to fulfill on all those other things that we're looking to, foster for our health and well-being more likely. So for instance, if you start with nutrition, and you're not addressing sleep first, you're setting yourself for an uphill battle, because we know even after one night, and certainly after 2, 3, 4 or more of poor sleep, so poor total sleep duration time and other factors of quality sleep, then we know that we're setting ourselves for a higher resting glucose state. So now you're going to be craving all the things that maybe you know not to have, and yet you're physiologically, the body is looking for that quick source of energy. So you might be making poor choices, or emotional regulation goes out the window. So then suddenly the lofty plans you had of getting to the gym or whatever, then they can easily start to fall away if you only got 4 hours of sleep the night before. Right. But then also all your gains that you're looking to make at, your performance with fitness or your waistline, we know that you're just at a much heightened disadvantage rate if you haven't been prioritizing first the sleep component.
So a lot of coaches, especially in the health and fitness industry, are listening to this podcast. And coaches, especially like personal trainers, they tend to be someone that has a lot of impact in someone's life because they see them 2 or 3 times a week, right? And so they have a lot of influence. And so if a coach is like, okay, I know that sleep's important, and I've read all the top tip articles or whatever, where do they start going deeper on at least getting a baseline understanding where they can maybe start helping some of the people that they're working with start experimenting and playing with ways to help their clients improve their sleep?
Yeah, great point. And I think there's a really solid argument to be made for coaches adding this in really intentionally for results for their clients, and really being on this forefront of what appears to be this emerging interest in sleep. And so then by putting that into all of your modalities and as part of the conversation, I think it makes you much more part of this cutting edge coach and all encompassing coach, and then could really help create some real massive change for people. But where do they begin? Well, a couple of things. One, there's so many resources. So even if you wanted to begin with, if you're like a books person, a popular book that a lot of people has actually sparked a lot of interest around sleep is Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. So that's got a lot of acclaim. So that could be a kind of gateway to this conversation. And he's a fantastic speaker, so you can find him on tons of podcasts and what have you. So that might spark some interest. That's just one step you could take. And then there are many podcasts. We're also a podcast that puts out all kinds of free information too, to support just like getting in on this conversation. And with one of the things we do on our store, we have this section on sleep as a skill with different resources. So there are different sleep optimization books and things that you can go in more deeply if you want, depending on what you might be dealing with or your client might be dealing with around sleep, because there's lots of different buckets for sleep. So there's the sleep deprivation camp that, they just haven't really prioritized sleep, and it just hasn't been, an important area of focus yet. And so that one, that you deal with that group very differently than the insomnia group, the people that are dying for sleep and want sleep and feel like they're doing everything, but then they just lay there and feel like they can't turn off their brain. So that group's, kind of a different way of approaching how to support them. So we do have a bunch of different book recommendations, podcasts. One of the things I love is that Andrew Huberman, if anyone is familiar with him, has been really popularizing the topics of sleep and really getting that out to the masses. So there's lots of different directions you can go. And we aim at Sleep as a Skill to be kind of a bucket to help support in any means that you want to get, some sleep information in, that you can do that. So our weekly newsletter, Sleep Obsessions, has the kind of rundown of different late breaking, sleep studies or articles or podcasts or, what have you, latest wearable tech, et cetera. So that you can kind of be in this conversation and then find that voice that fits what you're looking for.
And that's just sleepasaskill.com.
Yeah, at sleepasaskill.com, you can begin by taking a sleep assessment. And so anything that you're dealing with your sleep, put that in, and then you'll get auto-triggered back some specific things to support wherever you're at with your sleep. Yeah, and then it will also give the optimized bedroom, which is a downloadable PDF for kind of high-tech, low-tech things that you can do to improve your sleep environment. That will also sign you up for getting that weekly newsletter as well as the weekly podcast. And then if you do want to go in more deeply or have other people in your life that could benefit from that, then we do have those cohorts. Or, we can also get into, one-on-ones if some people are really dealing with some real struggles. I would also say tracking is, our bread and butter too. So if you're not already using a sleep specific tracker, then highly encourage people to look at that because it just really throws you into the game very quickly.
Is Samsung coming out with a sleep ring?
So there are a lot of rings to come. So there's a few different rings, and then there's even some really exciting rumbles of different pieces of tech that are coming. So CES is a great source for this. So Consumer Electronics Show comes out in January in Vegas every year. So this past year was looking at all different types of tech, including things like radar tech. So even if you don't want anything on you, then you can use radar to be tracking your sleep. So it stretches the gamut of lots of different types of options. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. All right. So I know you've got some things to do. So I want to just finish up with some quick rapid fire, super simple questions. The first one, I know you're in a place where these are very popular, but taco, burrito, or quesadilla?
Oh my God. So tacos, and I'm in Austin. So yep, exactly. I've become a big taco proponent.
All right. If you could live in any cartoon world for a week, what cartoon world do you choose to live in?
Oh my gosh. Where I guess Family Guy is the first thing that comes to mind just because of its ridiculousness. I've been really, I'm in an improv class right now. So just the, the veering into the comedy side of things and just the ridiculousness that is that show. Why not?
I love it. All right. If you were reincarnated as an animal based upon your personality, what animal do you come back as?
Oh my God. My husband always calls me a turtle. And so thanks. And so I try to rep the positive sides of the turtle being, they're one of the oldest DNA on the planet. Right. They live for a very long time. Very slow and controlled, but hopefully some wise characters in there. We like to think after some of them can be, centenarians and over. So, why not?
I love it. I think that's accurate. They just keep going. Just keep going.
Just keep going. Totally. Yeah.
I love it. All right. Last one. If you could have dinner with anyone on the planet, past or present, who do you sit down with and have a conversation?
Ooh, oh my goodness. Well, right now, as I had just mentioned, Andrew Huberman, I would love that because I'm so grateful for some of the work that he is doing to kind of inspire this interest into how your biology can inform your psychology. And I feel like that's a very empowering stance, especially coming from some of these institutions that maybe previously just might have had some different approaches and now I feel like it's kind of shaken things up a bit.
You're very politically correct. I appreciate that. You're not calling anybody out.
My mom was a politician. My mom was a politician as a state rep. My uncle was Attorney General of Maine. So I used to go door to dooring when I was little. So maybe there's some of that there.
Can we get anything else? Door to door, telemarketer. I mean,
I know, right? What is this? Selling vacuums? What's happening?
I love it. So lifeisaskill.com. People can find out about you there. How about any other places? Any of the socials?
Sleep is a skill. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Sleep is a skill.
I love the life as a skill because I feel like that is a whole area in and of itself, right? The skill set of life design. But yes, totally sleepisaskill.com. And on social, and we have all the socials too on there. But totally on Instagram and Mollie Eastman and all of those platforms.
Cool. We'll put it all in the show notes. So Mollie, I really appreciate you taking some time today.
Oh, Trevor, I so appreciate you. I loved just the energy that you brought to Super Coach was incredible. I got so much out of that event. It was just amazing. And so I'm such a fan of what you all are doing and really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Mollie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Coach Catalyst podcast. If you are a coach looking to do more for your clients than just workouts, give Coach Catalyst a test drive. Try it for 14 days. Jump on call with your personal strategy coach, Ashley, and see how easy technology can be, all for free. Tell them Trevor sent you. Until next time, keep changing lives.